Okay, I'm here with my good friend Anil. Anil, we met many years ago when you were a high school student, right? And now you're a top dog physician, huge practice, world leader in this field. So let's talk about when we first met. I met you when you were a high school student, right? Correct? That was
Yeah, yeah.
the functional.
Around that time, I had a full set of hair around that time too, just like you.
I have black
Yeah.
hair. My hair is gray. So yeah. So how many years ago? Was that 25 years ago or longer?
It's about 21 years ago, approximately. We first met. I took my first course with you in
Wait.
person, back when you were teaching it in person.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. I was on the road every weekend. So was it in Florida we met first
In
time?
Florida, correct? Yep.
So I remember I met you just talking to you during the seminar, and you're like, "Oh, I'm still a high school student. I'm trying to figure out what to do," which really blew me away because that's a different personality. Like, high school students going to a phone, and it's not like you just stopped by for an hour. You were there the whole time. Like you were there.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, why is a high school student here to learn functional medicine? This is a different person. So what was going through your head? And to this day, I need to like give me the answer.
Well, it's really interesting. One of my high school coaches basically got me exposed to a technique using dark field phase contrast microscopy. This microscope right here, right? Which exposed me to the whole world of unddenatured peripheral blood and nutritional microscopy. And I know there's some criticisms of this technique, but that technique really exposed me to the whole world of molecular microbiology and medical laboratory sciences, which I went on to further study in undergrad. He introduced me to this technique because at the time when I was a teenager in high school, I was working at Whole Foods Market in the nutraceutical section. So I was selling all these supplements, learning about, homeopathy, botanical medicine, and all the different, therapeutic applications for supplements from some of the top, I would say thought leaders in the space, authors and other physicians, like for example, Michael Murray. I'm like 17 years old listening to Michael Murray, who wrote the textbook, an encyclopedia for natural medicine, lecturing for the company Natural Factors about the benefits of omega-3 and turmeric and, DIM and all these other amazing, nutraceuticals and their various levels of clinical application. So, the culmination of, working at Whole Foods, getting exposed to all these natural modalities, and this was back when the hippies owned Whole Foods, John Mackey and stuff before Amazon took over. It was a different culture. It was a different time. There was, I was really just completely ingrained with like learning about, the nutraceutical applications in medicine. I didn't even want to become a medical doctor, just because they didn't get it. Allopathic medicine just didn't have room for those kind of applications in its kind of toolkit. So for me, that's kind of where I entered this space of the healing arts and natural medicine was working at Whole Foods Market. And then from there, like I said, I got exposed to the nutritional microscopy by my high school wrestling coach, which then led me to your seminar with Apex Energetics back in the day on functional blood chemistry, because it's balancing out that qualitative and quantitative associations between what you could see morphologically under the microscope, making those clinical associations with like the CBC and all the other metrics that we could get from standard lab chemistry.
Okay. So then where did you transition to go now? Okay, I'm going to go into medical school.
Yeah, so I went to Ross University, School of Medicine. I completed my residency at University of Maryland, and in family medicine. And during that entire time, I've been studying functional medicine, every step of the way. Um,
I mean, just with Michael Murray's influence, I figured you'd go to like Bastyr and go to the naturopathic program, but you went into medicine. So what was a factor there?
so when I was 18, Whole Foods sent me to this botanical medicine conference. It's called Medicines from the Earth, and it's hosted annually in the foothills of North Carolina and the Black Rocky or the Black something mountains. And I remember going there and meeting a ton of naturopaths, and the former late naturopath and former dean of Bastyr University, Bill Mitchell. And energy was high. We were doing yoga, breath work, meditation, all sorts of botanicals were in flow, gotu kola, ginkgo, so all sorts of energies were flowing. And I remember sitting around the campfire with the former and late Dr. Bill Mitchell, and he told me, hey, go the MD route, just go the MD route, circle back, infuse natural medicine into your kind of practice, and you won't go wrong. Just because, again, I'm from Florida. Florida is not, necessarily a friendly state towards integrative medicine. And he said that if you basically go the allopathic route, you're going to have the best career opportunities, because sometimes the scope of practice for naturopathy is very limiting. So that was kind of one of the defining moments where I was like, oh man, I guess I'll go that route.
Yeah, well, that was a
But
good mentor for
yeah,
you. Good sense of direction, understanding the political game, and also, I mean, it's the ultimate scope of practice. You can do whatever, you don't have to be limited by state laws or different jurisdictions or different things for practicing. So it's a very good advice. So,
yeah.
so then you go through medical school. Are you frustrated all the way through medical school, or are you okay with it?
Well, before I even go to medical school, I'm doing like trainings with like Peter Diadamo, right? With he had this whole thing with the Institute for Human Individuality, where he was really starting to look at these different anthropometric associations with phenotyping, and it's upstream molecular associations with genotyping. So he kind of really started infusing this nutraceutical or nutrigenomic association into clinical practice. It was around the time that he was moving from the Swami software to the Opus 23 software that he had developed. And so I studied, pretty extensively with the Dr. Peter Adamo. And I also did a 2-year seminar series while I was in undergrad with the Paracelsus Clinic of Biological Medicine out of Switzerland. So I was studying all this European biological medicine. And if you're familiar with that, it's essentially looking at the German isopathic homeopathic remedies. It's looking at various levels of clinical acupuncture and neural therapy, as different therapeutic applications. It really infuses biological dentistry into kind of assessing the individual and their therapeutic order of healing. So I did all of that. Then I went to med school, and yeah, sure, med school was interesting. It kind of really formalized my undergraduate training and everything that I kind of learned, going through those different trainings and, on the alternative side. And it frustrating? It was, because again, it was a very like kind of pill for ill model. It's like knowing Reckewig's model of homotoxicology and then taking pathophysiology by, Rubens, or, was really challenging. Robbins or Rubens' book of pathophysiology. It was just interesting to see because there's a lot of overlap there, but just a different language of communicating this, clinically. Because I do believe that it's essentially the same thing. If you look at those theories and principles, it's the same thing. It's just how do you explain it? How do you get from point A to point B? Reckewig described it as a progressive vicariation, but in the world of pathophysiology, it's just this progression towards this disease state. And it was kind of interesting and frustrating about like, all right, there's no real integrative modalities there to work upstream to modulate, enhance, support, prevent some of these illnesses. It was just very reactionary based model. But it was interesting too. While I was in medical school, I went and studied with Andrew Weil at University of Arizona, did the elective rotation and integrative medicine, and had a great network and time out there for a while, studying with him and what they were doing as well. So med school was fun and interesting. And then I was doing all the IFM stuff, I was doing A4M stuff, since undergrad and during med school. You actually even wrote me a letter of recommendation for the IFM that helped me get one of the scholarships
Oh,
for one of the modules. And
I don't
that
even
was,
remember
my
that.
good. Yeah, that was like 2012 or so. So that's,
Wow.
almost 12, 13 years ago.
Well, I for sure
And
remember. I was like, it was just you can present at the time. And then, okay, right. I remember seeing you at the IFM conference one year. I'm
yeah,
like, holy shit, you
yeah,
did it. I was so proud of
yeah, I did do it.
you.
Yeah. We got caught up because, when you're in med school, you're just in this weird time of just like nothing else exists in life. You're just
Yeah,
in
yeah.
med school, nose down, nose in the books and just grinding through, just making sure that you're moving on to the next phase because medical school is very grueling. You got 4 years of med school and residency, and a lot of things are kind of compromised. It's just really hard to maintain self-care and all sorts of stuff while you're in medical school when you're essentially a functioning zombie, certain
Right.
times when you're on night shifts and you're up for 36 plus hours and everything else in between. So that was interesting. And I finished med school, and then around that time too, I was doing like I did medical acupuncture at University of Miami. I did training in clinical homeopathy with the CEDH. I've done tons of stuff with you over the years. And
Yeah.
then finishing residency and sitting for my boards in family medicine, I had everything needed to sit for my boards in anti-aging regenerative medicine with the A4M, and I sat for the certification with the IFM, so becoming an IFM certified practitioner. And I've said this to you every single step of the way. You've been one of the greatest influences for me clinically. Jeff Bland is great. He's been a mentor for me as well. Your trainings, though, has set the foundation for me and my functional approach to everything that I do clinically, right? I really feel as though that you've offer some of the greatest like educational resources needed to execute clinically and implement into your office Monday morning. You have everything that's needed. I'm not just saying that because we're speaking right now. I've said that to you every time I see you,
Thank
and
you.
every person that's around. I sing your praises, because I really think that you really know how to put everything together and present in a format that's digestible and clinically actionable. And that's really, really important. So I really value, what you've done for me clinically over the years, so I'm your protege.
Well, yeah, I can tell you, from a person that goes to conferences, I didn't go to as many conferences as you did. You were everywhere, everywhere. But I remember as a student, um, that's like a person's waste. The person is committing their weekend or their time with you, and if it sucks, it's like you just destroyed someone's weekend and time they had with other things. It's like, please let this be good, And I think as you're an educator, you teach, you know what I mean? And I know you're a great teacher also when it comes to really getting principles across and doing things like if you care about it, you can get it across, Like I really care about someone going through something and going, this wasn't a waste of time for them. And like this is exactly how I do it. And I think that's important. So with your experience of going through all these different educational sources like A4M and IFM and the stuff, there are stuff through that I've done. Um, what kind of advice would you give to someone who's new? Because I think what happens to a lot of people that are into functional medicine is they don't know like where to commit to, they don't know where to head to. Do they say, should they take everything? Should they stay up with one thing? What would be your recommendation if you saw a very young, passionate person wanting to learn functional medicine and just going, hey, I don't know, should I go to everything? What should I do? What would you do? What would you recommend now?
It's so interesting because I get that question very, very often. And it's really depends on where somebody is in their career, their professional career, and what kind of license they hold and what they're looking to achieve and get out of everything. So, needless to say, I'm going to always direct people back to you and what you've kind of put together in your different delivery platforms, whether it's Crosian Institute or Apex Energetics, because I think it's top notch. It's everything that you need to really just go through and have a comprehensive understanding from start to finish, diagnosis to treatment, and weighing out both, integrative kind of modalities, plus, also infusing the allopathic interventions as well. So for me, I always say, hey, if you really want to get to the nuts and bolts of actionable insights, anything you do is where to go. Now, obviously, there I teach at George Washington University for the master's degree in integrative medicine under I'm faculty there for the under the clinical research and leadership department, and I teach a good amount of classes there. And so I always say, hey, well, if you're maybe in med school or, a physician, and you're looking for that additional board certification, going through our master's degree makes the most sense because you could leave there with a board certification in integrative medicine, right, which is clinically recognized amongst the allopathic community. And you also could sit for your board exam in lifestyle medicine, right? So that's another really good. So you could get double boarded from our master's degree alone. And you could also go for a board in clinical nutrition. So you could walk away from doing this program with so many different avenues if that's what matters to you, right? And I do think that our curriculum is kind of modeled after the A4M modular system. So that's kind of where we get the foundational educational material from. So that might be, kind of tied into the A4M network, generally speaking. And I really like A4M as well. So I really think it just depends on what resonates with the individual and what they're seeking to achieve at the end of their training.
And then for you, I know you do a lot of biohacking and you do a lot of different types of therapies in your practice. And then how did you transition into that? I mean, I know you do functional medicine at a high level, but when did you start to see the value of incorporate those things? And like right now in your practice, what do you have in your practice that you use?
I have a lot of fun toys, right? I mean, I have everything from, EBOO, ozone, hemolumin, which is UV blood radiation, hyperbaric oxygen therapy,
Can you
whole
like
body photo.
can you explain like EBOO and all these things for people that aren't familiar with it, like one by one?
So basically, extracorporeal blood ozonation oxygenation is a technique that was originally developed in Germany. Basically that requires you to extract the blood, and it's run through essentially a filtering mechanism, and that removes a lot of the impurities in the blood. Um, I don't want to make any claims, but it can, let's just say, decrease your total toxic burden as a whole, and infuses ozone gas into the blood to increase the amount of dissolved oxygen in the system. Indirectly, that has a direct effect on NRF2 signaling, right, which is your body's endogenous antioxidant pathway. So it's really important for kind of creating a healthy redox state within the blood chemistry from a hemodynamic perspective. So that's a really great technique that could be used clinically for multiple applications. But again, using I want to be safe with my language around this and not make any claims of saying, hey, this is going to be used for treating Lyme disease or chronic Epstein-Barr virus or whatever it is. But let's just say it helps support and modulate the immune system and address some of those underlying immunological dynamics and infectious components, and also helps with performance as a whole. So it's a really interesting technique. And clinically, I think has a lot of therapeutic applications. And then, for example, the hemolumin is a really interesting technique where you take the blood out and it's exposed to 6 different wavelengths of light. Again, another German technique. And it basically has been shown to help address infections, stimulate and enhance the immune system, and enhance the mitochondrial function and a couple of other things. So those are some really powerful techniques. So, if somebody's just, really challenged, in their ability to heal and their total toxic body burden, whether it's infectious or, environmental toxins or whatever it is, biotoxins, mycotoxins, whatever it is, you could go through some of these therapies to give you kind of a jump start towards healing. Um, so I find that very interesting. So those are two really powerful, strong techniques in the practice. You know about hyperbaric oxygen therapy, again, infusing pressurized oxygen to allow for dissolved, oxygen into the blood to help with increasing overall, circulation. And it's been shown to help with so many different things and support so many different things. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Afradi from Israel, who did some of those papers and studies around hyperbaric oxygen therapy and cycling hyperoxia, additional oxygen and coming off of it in the chamber and doing these little sessions and its effect on telomerase activity, which is essentially telomerase. You know what telomerase is, but for your viewers, it's just basically the end, the caps at the end of your chromosomes that are responsible for stabilization after every single mitotic process. The amount of telomeres goes down with time. Things that have been shown to really help enhance telomerase activity, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, exercise. There's a product derived from astragalus called TA65. So all those things are, really targeting that essential hallmark in the biological aging process. So hyperbaric oxygen therapy is really big. I have a regen pod, which is essentially whole body photobiomodulation. And when you get into PBM, essentially it's been shown to help with enhancing cytochrome C oxidase, which is very important for mitochondrial structure function enhancement, which is very important. And I think,
You see like
some of the
the
healing
red light
process.
coffin. Is that what you have? The whole like
Yeah,
red.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, and there's newer designs that are coming out where the coffin just comes down on you and it's still like open on the sides. I really like the regen pod. I think the different wavelengths, the pulses that it does.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot, a lot better comparatively to some of the other um instruments on the market. But I don't want to say anything conflicting or, polarizing to anybody that might have other tech in their practice. We have a biocharger, which I got because I think it looked cool,
Is it?
the jury's still out on it. I think if you sit with intention, with the biocharger, it's essentially emitting four different wavelengths of light, sound, so harmonic frequency, photobiomodulation, electromagnetic field, and charge. It's super interesting. It's based on Tesla technology and Tesla bulbs and Rife technology and frequencies and all this stuff. I think, for me and my patients, what they've endorsed and shared with me so far, it's like it's either a hit or a miss. I think, if you're going to set the intention to receive the message that it has to deliver, phone down, focus on, receiving that kind of, that shift, so to speak. It moves energy. Everything we do moves energy, enhances energy, right? So we have a biocharger, we have a nano V, which is, again, helping with enhancing endogenous antioxidant capacity and removing misfolded proteins from the system and a couple of other things. We have, transcranial photobiomodulation, at 1070 nanometers to help with enhancing cognitive health and part of our brain optimization kind of performance side of things. And there's a couple of other toys, the contrast therapy, sauna ozone, cold therapy, from cold plunge. And then, we got a Vasper, that we stack with exercising with oxygen. So this diphasic contrast therapy to help with your performance and recovery, enhancing VO2 max. So, I VO2 max my patients and basically establish that baseline, get them connected with a personal trainer, nutritionist, and they're able to kind of get a better appreciation of how we're moving that needle with these different technologies. Not to mention, we do tons of IVs, and then the kicker for me is something called V cell therapy. So we do a technique called V cell therapy, and V cells are essentially very small embryonic like stem cells that are derived from your blood. And there are different methods of preparing these V cells and using different laser technology to kind of guide the V cells once they're infused back into the system where to go. And very interesting protocols around that in regards to whole brain protocol, I would say endocrine rejuvenation and things of that nature. So it's a very interesting technique that I just started doing here in my practice about 6 months ago. And the results are pretty interesting, and clinically, there's some claims out there that it reverses biological age by 3 years per session. And those results are cumulative. So I kind of put people through the gauntlet. Yeah, I do a huge audit on my patients. I genotype everybody, that comes to my practice just to know kind
What
of.
are you using for genotyping?
It depends on resources. There's a few different companies that I like and I endorse. I really do like self-decode, right? I think, from a economic perspective, they offer some really great insights into polygenic risk scores and additional factors that could be influencing their individuals' genetic vulnerabilities and predispositions. I also really like New Amsterdam genomics, so which is complete external sequencing. So it really just depends on resources. There's a huge price difference between the two testing. For my medical mysteries, I prefer to go with New Amsterdam genomics. I think it's more comprehensive, it's more complete. It's just
So
more
what does that
expensive.
profile cost right now?
Um, I think for the average provider, the cost for New Amsterdam is close to 3 grand.
3 grand.
And then for self to code, I tell patients, go get it yourself, own your data, share it with me. And I think that's around 300 to 400 bucks.
Oh, okay.
Um, so there's a variation in spectrum. And again, using this information just to kind of understand where to look under the hood and what to pay attention to. And for me, one of the classes I teach at GW is the omics of medicine,
Mm.
INTM 6205. And this course, I teach other doctors. I'm actually week 2 in the course right now as we speak. And the feedback that I've been getting from my students have been overwhelmingly positive about, opening up this perspective on various levels of clinical applications using what I call omics in medicine, connecting those molecular dots from genome to phenome. And so for me, I genotype everybody. I put I use that as a launching point to move up the molecular ladder to proteomics, metabolomics, epigenetics, exposomics, microbiomics, and so forth, so that we could get a really good comprehensive analysis of individuals' phenotype,
Okay.
their phenomics.
So give me an idea, like if a person comes in who's like ill but doesn't have a named disease or diagnosis, right? They just have general symptoms and they've had an array of tests. What what's going to happen when they walk in? They can do the genomics testing by you as an initial test, right? And then
Mhm,
you're going to review the lab records, right? Go through that process.
mhm.
And let's just say they come back and there's like, just some subtle signs of, typical things we see in functional medicine. Maybe they have some barrier issues or dysbiosis or leaky gut and some environmental exposures. So then, like, what happens in a patient like that with you? Would you then
Well,
recommend therapies or how does it go? Like, it seems like you have so
it,
many options. Like, it's tough to choose where to start, and then I'm sure
yeah.
patient finances will dictate how it works. And so, what do you do? It's very interesting.
Yeah, it really just depends on the clinical presentation. We in one of my practices through GW with my mentor Andrew Heyman, who's the director for the American Academy for Anti-Aging Medicine. I'm, part-time in that practice for the past few years, and basically we deal with a lot of chronic complex illness. And we've had, you and I have had this conversation offline about some of the different environmentally induced and kind of sensitivities and how that kind of mixes things up. So I just want to make sure that we have a clear cut direction of what their diagnosis is. And if we get a sniff of this SIRS medicine, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, that's going to point us in a different direction, because outside of all your typical illnesses, the bulk of these medical mysteries can be grouped into whether it's, some sort of vector-borne illness such as Lyme disease, Bartonella, Babesia, or so forth, or chronic Epstein-Barr virus, or mycotoxin or biotoxin related illness. That's oftentimes the misdiagnosis, right? And there is a very specific case diagnosis for SIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and we actually use like transcriptomic data in this practice to further unpack what's going on. So for the audience, what the transcriptome is looking at RNA expression. So, if your DNA were the instruments for your own personal symphony orchestra, the transcriptome is measuring the harmony coming off of those instruments. Now, I know there's a lot of criticisms about transcriptomes and the stability of it and being able to capture a molecular signature, the diurnal patterns of certain things. But I really feel as though, for me, clinically, using this data has really helped point us in a direction that we're able to unpack very specific molecular signatures of immunological perturbations or imbalances, also mitochondrial disruption. So, for example, the very first panel we look at, is a group of genes and their RNA expression that looks at essentially assessing for something, a phenomenon called cell danger response. I'm sure you're familiar with that paper, Dr. Robert Navinow, and how when your cells are exposed to environmental threats, they respond by conserving energy, right? And they kind of down regulate. And that gives rise to, the fatigue and all the different symptoms associated with, that cellular threat. So instead of having a cell that's a very healthy, robust nuclear power factory producing tons of energy and ATP, it kind of shifts modes and takes on this defensive posturing where it down regulates and conserves energy. And we see that on a molecular level, and that's affecting your mitochondria, right? So we actually see that, cell danger response, within the transcriptome with a phenomenon that we call molecular hypometabolism,
So
right?
what are you measuring transcriptive markers? Who are you using? What are you doing with
So
that?
we use a company called Progene DX. They're out of Boston, right? Jimmy, yeah, Dr. Jimmy is the one that is running that lab, and I think the group of genes that are kind of assessed, on the transcriptomic level for us is really clinically significant. It's validated with the research in the literature, and again, it's a whole nother 6-week course, on a graduate level course that we teach, that helps with really unpacking how that, the clinical associations that you could delineate from that. Because, beyond molecular hypometabolism, we're actually able to see shifts in the triaging of energy, which ties back into the Warburg effect, right? And being locked into a state of aerobic glycolysis where you don't have the ability to appropriately synthesize energy appropriately, right? So there's all these amazing molecular associations that you could do from this one test. And for me, clinically, whenever there's some level of medical mystery and we get a sniff of SIRS because they meet the criteria, and then we have some screening tests, and then we have some additional biomarkers that we use like TGF beta 1, MMP9, C4A. And C4A is very a sensitive test that we prefer to get from National Jewish, and Quest Labs is kind of one of those labs that we use to send over C4A to National Jewish. We VEGF, and a whole host of other, kind of proteomic signatures that we look for. That points us in a direction because, as you know, most disease processes have some sort of inflammation, oxidation, ischemia, and immunological dysregulation mediating that pathophysiological,
Yeah.
issue, whatever it is, right? And we see that. We look at coag genes, we look at a bunch of other things, within the transcriptome, and it points us in a direction of what to therapeutically prioritize in this individual. And we even look at PTSD. I mean, people have
Yeah.
really bad PTSD. Their FKBP5 gene, which is really well established in the literature as the PTSD gene, is upregulated. And, that we both know that if you don't resolve trauma, unlocking the healing mechanisms could be quite difficult because these individuals are constantly in that sympathetic fight or flight state of dominancy, and their HRV's low, their sleep is shit, and everything else in between.
So let me ask you a question. Like when you get all this data, sometimes you have like so much data, you have to interpret where to start, but ultimately, does the patient respond or not respond becomes a really important clinical factor of what you continue doing, what you don't continue doing. With some of these really chronic patients where you don't see results right away, how are you juggling that as a clinician, you know?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it really just depends on the clinical presentation, right? I'm not going to make any claims that I have the secret sauce to anything.
Let's say someone has like chronic inflammatory respiratory syndrome and it's clear
Mhm.
from their history, they had this exposure, water and damp building syndrome, mycotoxin exposure, they're sick, they're ill, their timeline clearly establishes that your markers all come in, they've taken back to supplements. Now what?
Dude, I'm telling you, this is like the thing that the craziest in this world of medicine that is borderline kind of so difficult and challenging because that C4A, it all boils down to that C4A number for me clinically, because if that C4A stays persistently elevated, that means, hey, there's ongoing exposure. And from our research, right, essentially when you get through the first phase of that whole system, and I'm sure Eric Doringer, he'll tell you, we're friends with Eric, you
Yeah,
know,
I know
and
Eric. He's a good friend of mine.
he will he will tell you, if you're
Are you
still
putting a
in
lot of
non
emphasis in those complement proteins as your tool to see what's going
uh,
on?
that in the transcriptome,
Mm.
right? Because that actually picks up some of the signaling associated with it. So if you don't get through step number one, which is removing yourself from ongoing exposure, treating any underlying infections or whatever it is, you're not going to get better. So it really just depends, because one of the more challenging things is like going to be chronic EBV, right? That
Yeah.
we see, and getting the immune system modulated to the point where it could kind of outpace the viral replication, so that the immune system could get a hold of the terrain and keep this the viral process kind of under wraps.
So so
That's one scenario.
so if you still have this, if you still have the C4a complement protein elevated, you assume clinically, or you have to really rule out that they're still getting exposed or not, or what's the thought process there?
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting because it trends, man. Like clinically, it trends, right? I could tell you right now, I see this all friggin' day, where people were like, "Oh, we did." They remediated. Let's say they appropriately remediated with the right indoor environmental professionals. Clinically, we use Mr. Larry Schwartz with Safe Start IAQ. He's out of Chicago. He's a sweetheart. Just had dinner with him a few
He does
weeks
house
ago.
remediation. Is that what he does?
He's the indoor environmental professional that allows for communicating with the remediation process. He helps coordinate that from a kind of a water damage building, SIRS, illness perspective. He, to me, is, he's been my mentor for a few years now. And just arguably I would say the world leader in this space. So essentially, yeah, if you go through and remediate appropriately, I've seen C4As in the 25,000 drop down to under 2,000. You go in and you do the binder, you remediate, you follow these simple, stupid steps. They're really basic and like stupid easy, right? But could be challenging. People get better. It's just so weird to see, right? Like they remove themselves from exposure, they do some sort of binder, and that could be argued. I'm not going to get into an argument about which binder is more efficacious than the other. We do some level of membrane exchange therapy with phospholipids and modulation of the inflammatory cytokinetic milieu with, different seropeptidase and omega-3 or SPM active and different things to help shift the chemistry and decrease that recirculation of that biotoxin from the system. And some people get better right there and they stop, the protocol. They're like, you know what, remediated, I binded, we use a VCS test. We look at some of those biomarkers. Things are trending in the right direction. Some people are like, I'm good. I'm good. I'm so much better now. Others, they might need some additional handholding. They make their way to the whole Marcons phase where you test for the Marcons and the sinuses and you go on
You
some
think that
beg.
test is accurate? Only one
Which one,
lab
the
after.
Marcons?
Yeah,
I do.
you do.
I do, because the thing is, it's mind blowing the amount of, so for some patients it's interesting to see their Marcon's trends, and you can speak to Joe Musto with the lab that owns it out in New York or somewhere. I forgot where the microbiology DX is, but essentially, you see people that test positive with a high biofilm in their sinuses, right? Or they'll have MRSA colonized in their sinuses. You treat the MRSA, you retest, the Marcons is there. You treat the Marcons that are in high levels with EDTA, silver, beg spray, whatever, dealer's choice. And there's arguments amongst the experts on what's the most appropriate intervention. They clear the Marcons, right? And you retest and it's gone, right? For some people, for me clinically, just treating the Marcons is that next kind of inflection point in their healing process where they're like, oh, I'm better now, right? I'm good. We could stop here, right? So I do think that, there's something to it, right? With testing and treating the Marcons. Clinically, the feedback I've gotten from my patients, I would say there's, different people hit different inflection points within this protocol, and they improve symptomatically by anywhere 50, 60, 70, 80%. And it's up to them, at a certain point in time, if we continue with the further, review of the process, which is essentially moving into, eliminating food sensitivities and allergies and, cleaning up the gut and then
Yeah.
looking at hormone optimization and everything in between,
Yeah, it's treat the whole patient and then the aftermath of all that chronic inflammation. What percentage of do you think go into autoimmune disease in your practice that you've seen?
It's interesting. Like, so as you know, I think there's going to be a subset of the population that will have a positive ANA with like non-specific speckled pattern or whatever when you look at it, but it doesn't really progress into anything meaningful. And it's interesting. I've had between us and your teachings, again, I learned this from you. You go in, you optimize, the vitamin D, you do the turmeric, you do some resveratrol, you do look at some LDN, you do the AIP. Oh my goodness, the ANA is gone, right? It's incredible. So I would say percentage wise that are coming to me with an established diagnosis of autoimmunity, and that's including Hashimoto's, is anywhere from 40 to 60%. I would say just rough numbers,
Yeah.
because I feel as though at least 50% of my patients have Hashimoto's, right? And I've learned everything about Hashimoto's from you, essentially, and I follow essentially, what you do, and we cut out the gluten, stress it a lot, and everything else that you have taught, and we get really good results, following that part within the protocol, and that's where, infusing these different schools of thought and philosophies into my clinical practice is kind of an amalgamation of everything that I've gathered over the years from your teachings and elsewhere. So. Yeah,
Yeah.
so there's a very strong population of autoimmunity that are
So
coming in with this.
there's the population of functional medicine practitioners that only have the tools of diet, nutrition, lifestyle available to them. They don't have the ability to do some of the therapies you're doing in your office. What do you think? When do you think a practitioner should seek out additional medical treatments? When do you like when or should they do it right away, or they start with the functional medicine approach first? Like, do you have any idea on that? Because I've been stuck with patients where like, man, let's say they have a mycotoxin related illness, and it's like, okay, this is all we can do with that nutrition lifestyle. We're here, and we might need to refer out or have you look at this on. So for me, like I've done it where I kind of come to the end of it and go, okay, or if I'll do history with someone, I do a case review before I see them. I go, you kind of have already done most of the things we've seen. I would suggest you do some more aggressive interventions.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to those practitioners that, don't do that yet, or it's not their scope of practice to do it? What do you recommend?
Dude, that's a loaded call
I
because
know.
there's all sorts of ego in the space. And I just try to stay in my lane. I just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
But I would say, hey, if you have somebody on like 40 supplements, they're still not better, and you're just trying to sell them the next wonder pill, stop.
Yeah.
Stop. Please don't do that. That's just not good. Just like polypharmacy, polynutraceuticals is like overkill, right? And I do think you should be, working a little bit more dietetically, nutritionally to kind of support the system versus just throwing a million and one supplements. And I'm sure you've seen it. We've all seen it. And it's just like, all right, is there a conflict of interest here, in regards to kickback when somebody's like, the provider is profiteering off of, you know, tons of supplement sales. That to me is bullshit, right?
Yeah.
So I really think clinically, if your patient's not getting better and you're scratching your head and you're just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks, whether it's diagnosis, whatever it is, take a step back and know who to reach out to and why and when and where. I would say clinically one of the more important things to keep in your domain of acknowledgement and differential diagnosis is going to be SIRS, and looking at maybe just screening with TGF beta 1, MMP9, C4A, and so forth, VEGF and MSH, just to see if you pick up that proteomic signature that could be consistent with this illness. So if that's the case, then I really do think you're dealing with a different beast and like understand what's going on there and probe a little bit further. Because if I see people that have been to like 30 to 50 different docs around the country and world. Our office with Andrew Heyman, and I'm only there part-time, that's all I can handle, is essentially the last stop on the train for a lot of people.
What's
Right.
the name of the clinic?
It's a Virginia Center for Health and Wellness.
Okay.
Yeah. So I try to do all that type of stuff there. In my private practice, I
Yeah.
kind of have a longevity forward lab that I put everything.
And for people like when it comes to like conflict of interest and concerns for unethical recommendations with supplements, but it also happens with people that do therapies too. Like we see it all the time. Like the
Oh
person
yeah.
that's on 20 chelation therapies or does all these different sessions with different modalities. What's the red flag for a practitioner? Because the worst thing for practitioners, they refer someone over there and they're like, oh, they made me do a $20,000 plan and I don't feel any better. And you're like, shit, why did I refer that person over there? I didn't know they're going to do that.
Yeah.
How would you advise practitioners to talk to patients about what they should say or what they should look out for?
So I would definitely, it depends on the scenario, right? Because everybody's situation's N of one and very unique, right?
Yeah,
And I do think that there's going to be a lot of, when everybody goes on this kind of the same kind of treatment regimen,
right.
and it's standardized, templated, non-personalized, that's a red flag. If they're not digging deeper and doing more comprehensive analysis, whether it's imaging or I brain map in my practice. I do a bunch of other things as well, to take a deeper dive to unpack some of those symptoms, especially from that functional neurology approach that you're the world leader in. I think it just really depends on, again, the symptomatic presentation. Red flags to me, I don't push anything onto anybody. I kind of say, hey, we got this. It's available. If you want it, it's there. I don't like pushing anything onto anybody.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's just so many red flags. And I could tell you a ton of scenarios where people are, they buy into these programs that are high ticketed values. I could tell you docs all over in my area, your area, because I'm licensed in almost all 50 states and I have patients from all over the country, telemedicine and whatnot. So I hear and I see like everyone. And, when they're like, hey, take my detox stuff and then, go and start doing, a million IVs or whatever it is, those are all red flags. For me, I'm preaching this whole N of one medicine narrative,
Yeah.
and I've shared with you offline. I'm like, I founded the American Board of Precision Medicine, and I really believe, to lead the paradigm shift in healthcare, you got to, operate efficaciously and ethically. And I think that, the future of medicine is very N of one. And so for me, I try to ride a very delicate line of just making sure what you do is ethical. I don't know if I answered your question because I don't know what
No,
the
I think
real
it's your question. I mean, I think the red flags are definitely everyone gets the same treatment. The huge packages that a person has to buy. Those are like I think two really really good red flags for a
yeah.
practitioner to know about if they're referring. Um, so what do you do? Like if you have all these tools in your office, what do you do? Do you like if you have a chance and you have a little bit of time to go into the photomodulation? What do you think, are the best preventative just things, things to just optimize your health
Yeah.
of all the tools you have? Let's say you don't
Oh,
have kids.
I run the circuit of everything, right? I try my best to
Yeah.
do everything that
Yeah.
I possibly can. Like, so I opened up where I'm sitting right now. On the other side of my wall is a jujitsu school that I train at, right?
Okay,
So,
cool.
like, my whole thing is I just want to be able to train and recover.
Yeah.
I just turned 40 on Monday, and keeping up with the college wrestler is my goal in life because it's hard, right? So for me, and that ties into my book, the longevity equation,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Yeah, share that, please.
Every everybody's longevity equation is different. And essentially, I do think that using different stacks are going to be very important. But some of the practices that I kind of do on a almost regular daily basis is like sauna therapy is really big for me. I have a sauna at the
How
house.
long do you how long do you go?
I usually go 45 minutes. I
Okay.
try to it, right?
Is it a traditional sauna or infrared sauna?
Infrared sauna.
Okay.
Yeah. I try to do that all the time. Like I was at the gym at 5 o'clock this morning, so I lift weights. I have a beautiful young daughter at home. She's essentially 17 months. She's keeps me on my toes. I try to eat dinner super early. I try to do some intermittent fasting. I take, supplements sporadically. I'm not going to do everything every day. I'm really bad about that
Yeah,
just because I don't think you should be doing everything every day. You start getting that little
sure.
like, all right, let's back off a little bit. Let's push pause for a few days and revisit it, and then, kind of fill up that tank again. So I take my nutraceuticals. I've been doing that for years, since a teenager. And what else? Train jujitsu. I lift weights. I like to box. I like to
Oh,
recover. We the
okay.
cold plunge and cryo. I do IVs, right? So, ethnically, I'm Indian. If my name didn't give it away, and my bald brown head and my beard and all that
What
stuff.
do you
So,
IV yourself?
what's that?
What do you use for IVs for yourself?
So I was about to say there's an IV that I'm in the series of right now. It's called Plaque X. Like I have significant plaque burden in my arteries, and I honestly am a bad Indian. I should be eating chickpeas and curry, but I like the sacred cow. I'm sorry. I just feel better when I eat meat. And so I'm trying to reverse my plaque burden with Plaque X. I'll do some, other targeted IVs with just throwing in a few additional stacks with the like a traditional Myers cocktail and glutathione, but I
Yeah.
don't overdo it. I try to like wash out and give it time to breathe and everything else because, again, if you go in there and you super saturate yourself with these different things, it disrupts the hemodynamics and the stasis of or the balance of certain signals and everything else. You don't want to overly reduce your cells and leave you kind of less malleable for or adaptable to different stresses. So I cycle on and off the IVs. I like that. I use the Nano V. I usually have it next to my desk here for recovery. So all those things, the red light, everything,
I
I
do a lot of similar things
it's
too.
tech for me, bro.
What's that?
What's it?
I do the infrared sauna 45 minutes a day, like in the middle of the day. And then I'll do a 10-minute cold plunge. And then I'll do red light therapy. And I have a pulse
Yeah,
oximetry. So it's kind of like a daily routine thing. Some days I don't
yeah,
do it, but you just get used to doing it. And then for me, I usually wake up at 4, I start working. And then by like noon one, I'm like my brain's exhausted, dead. And then I'll do that. Once I do that protocol, I can go for another day, like the rest of the day.
yeah.
And it's pretty good.
Get
So,
started.
but it
Yeah,
makes a huge difference to learn how to
yeah.
like figure out how to
Yes.
biohack yourself and, and improve your efficiency, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's it. That's it. And honestly, I got all the tech for me. Like my practice, I don't let everybody in. I send more people away than I accept to my practice. Like I don't want to deal with everybody. I
Yeah,
I want to deal with people that I'm gonna get along with,
that's
right?
a good
And
point.
for
That's
therapeutic
that's an
relationships.
evolution of I think of practitioners as they um get more demand than they have time for, and also understand the mental health of what kind of patients you take on. I think practitioners, this is a really good point. We need to spend a few minutes on this. I think practitioners like they think they have this responsibility to take anyone that just walks into the door. And if you do that, you for sure will not be happy to go and practice many days. And I know I do like a case review process where I look at their case, I can talk to them and see what's going on. But a lot of times the case review, the questions we ask about the medical file, and do you blame anyone for your care? What's worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? What a practitioner told you? Like you can kind of feel, what's happening with the patient, right? Like the angry patient, and you're the next person to be angry with, is always like a red flag. No, thank you. And
Yeah, yeah.
that's another key thing too, is like we have to make sure our mental health is the right way. And practitioners have unrealistic expectations are totally exhausting. You know what I mean? And practitioners that maybe think you're out to get them is also exhausting or something like that. What are the main screening things you look for? Like, what's the red flags for you? Like, what do you, what do you want in your practice, and what do you try to keep out?
I'm afraid to say because then they're getting these
They're
people are
gonna
gonna
use it
manipulate the situation. But just for me,
generally.
the biggest red flag is this: like when you send me, a dissertation of your whole history before I even see you, and you call my office 6 times to schedule an appointment, I'm not going to see you. I'm just not, right? If you've been to 30 different doctors doing very similar things that I know half of those doctors and they're friends of mine, it's a small space, that we're in and we're operating in. And you're, kind of you didn't respond. I don't trust it. I'm going to reach out to that other doctor to find out first. And especially when it comes down to SIRS medicine, between you and I don't like it, right? The
Yeah.
bulk of it. I don't like it.
You do get a weird patient population in that community.
Not for me, dude. I'm
I'm just saying it's
that.
out there, out there. It's out there.
Well, and the thing is, how much of it, I don't want, now I'm going to sound like an asshole, but how much of it is psychosomatic, right?
Right?
And it's just like, oh, and I get it. It's a real illness for a lot of people,
It is.
but like, it's just like chronic Lyme, and it's just like a lot of people suffer with chronic Lyme. And my nurse suffers from chronic Lyme. She tells me how she suffers from chronic Lyme. She's got a port in her chest.
Yeah.
And, that's a whole nother thing. For me personally, I reached this point where I don't want to be your doctor. I want to become your health intelligence partner and have fun
Nice.
unpacking the quantified self. I feel as though, again, with my molecular background, understanding the molecular you and connecting these dots for me is just so much fun, right? I just had a professional rugby player in my office yesterday, and we went over his genomic data, and he was floored. I told him everything about himself, right? And he was just floored from his family history. I try to sometimes reverse engineer it, by getting their DNA first and then tell them, this is what I found. Do you experience this, that, and the other? And they're like, and basically describe themselves to them, right? So, for me, it's fun working with people that are highly motivated to optimize their health. The name of my private practice, more importantly, is the Institute for Human Optimization. I'm all about optimizing self and having fun doing it. And, offering, I call the people that come and work with me are family. They have my cell phone number. They don't abuse it. If they need anything, I'm there for them. And the bulk of my patients are doctors, physicians, because they really appreciate this multi-omic approach to personalized medicine that I do, and executives and athletes, right? So that's kind of the group that I work with. Like I just had a 76-year-old, an older ophthalmologist from Hopkins. I hope I didn't say too much, but he's super cool. And he was like, him and his wife came into the office, and, he was borderline in tears when we started going through all these longevity things. And he's like, I've been looking for a doctor like you my entire life. Nobody listens to me, when it comes down to, nutrition and, these different biohacks. He's like, he's got red light, he's doing all the things, he recommends antioxidants to all his patients, the astaxanthin he's super excited about, and I'm like, I know. And he reads Life Extensions magazine. He's been doing it for 30 years and all this stuff. And I share that excitement. I love going through, the literature, having fun, looking at the blood and then trying to, make heads and tails over all the data points that we get and make it translatable and connect those dots. I just want to have fun,
Yeah.
with
It's
this.
interesting the psychology of like the physician that's sick themselves and they need to find help and then they finally find help. They're in the same boat. It's I think it's so difficult for them because they're realizing like I might have not been taught the right way for certain conditions and I don't know what to do. And it's just such a shock to the system for them, you know? Uh,
Mhm.
and I have a lot of practitioners in my office too. It's the same thing. And it's like, it's so different. I mean, we as practitioners, we all get sick. We all need help. We have to find our
Mhm.
colleagues and friends that do it. So finishing up here, where
Mhm.
can people find more stuff about your approach and stuff? So you have your book. Can you show the book again? Is it
Yeah, so the book
available
is
now on
actually
Amazon?
not yet. Hopefully soon. My publisher's yelling at me. I just got some updated graphics for the book. So it's called The Longevity Equation. I'm hoping in the next like month or two or so it'll be out. I've been saying that for the past year,
Yeah.
but we're very close to getting it done. I'm just trying to always put in new studies and new kind of therapies and everything else. So it's never going to be ready, but I just need to bite the bullet and just get it out. So again, I've been
It's
waiting
the
on
first
final.
edition now.
It's
You
the
can
first edition,
say first.
right? So again, this isn't meant for the doctor. It's meant for the generalized consumer on how to kind of use this information to kind of personalize their approach to longevity, right? I think everybody's equation is different.
Yeah.
And just simply put, it's a multitude of it's looking at things through the lens of the quantified self. Once you understand your data and your genetic weaknesses and your environmental inputs on the exposome and how that influences gene expression, we can look at the biological aging process through the lens of the hallmarks and address those issues, kind of reductionistically, but also, infuse all these other kind of biohacking modalities to theoretically undo some of the damage. We discussed telomerase activity in HBOT and some other nutraceutical interventions. We discussed, photobiomodulation on mitochondrial health, which is another hallmark. The one hallmark that I really pay attention to and is genomic instability, genetic instability. I think that's one of the, most important things that we need to look for is mitigating any potential DNA damage, right? And make sure we're enhancing our DNA proofreading repair enzyme activity with the appropriate supplements. We're doing things to clear out, these damaged cells through fasting and inducing autophagy and all that other fun stuff. So,
Sure.
so again, yeah, the book is
People,
there.
is there a website you have?
Yeah, so I got a bunch of websites. You could just Google my name and com. I've got ifho.org, the Institute for Human Optimization.org. I have longevityequation.net. I've got a few other things, but those are the primary things. And you could just find me on like Instagram. I don't post on Instagram. Wifey does for me. She just takes all my stuff and just throws it up there and, you
So-
know, handles that. But find me on Instagram and social stuff, I guess, and my private practice.
And we always end these with one last question. What do you recommend to new functional medicine practitioners, and what do you recommend to advanced functional medicine practitioners that are on this journey of becoming, the best practitioner they can be?
Have fun. Have fun doing it, right? Don't beat yourself up. I beat myself up for the longest while because I always wanted to be you when I grew up. I'm like, oh man, I got to go and study this and then this and then this. And then I got to go do functional neurology so I could, be able to talk to Tatis and discuss these crazy neuro cases and everything else. And it's just like there's just too much to learn. Just know what you're good at and have fun with it. And just, if you start losing that spark, like a lot of docs do, stop, reevaluate what you're doing in life. And what I did is I left working, really busy urgent care. I worked for a couple other integrative practices and I said, screw everything. I'm doing my own thing, right? I opened up next to my jujitsu school so I could go train and choke people for lunch, shower, see patients in the afternoon, do some biohacking. I'm creating the world that I want to live in for me and the people I love and care about, friends and family and my patients. I even call, their family. So that's what I would say is don't lose that spark. If you're starting to feel the burn, reevaluate. I am honestly, I'm not money motivated, right? I probably should be with the amount of debt I'm in to get all these technologies, but I don't care. I just want to have fun, with what I do and keep my passion because this isn't work for me,
Yeah.
And, I think it's that ancient Chinese proverb, like, if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life or something. And that's what I strive towards. So for advanced practitioners, I would say, hey, don't stop learning. I'm a conference junkie. Every opportunity I get, like, I'm going to go and start uh, pursue my board certification in lipidology here, this year, the NLA. Why? Because
Why not?
why not? You know,
Yes.
sure. Oh, all right. I'm starting my own board of medicine and, with the American Board of Precision Medicine, we got some amazing rock stars from all over the country, from Harvard, Stanford, Pitt, UCSD, all over the country. We've got amazing faculty that we're recruiting and building an amazing curriculum to change and lead the paradigm shift in healthcare towards adopting this new kind of a personalized approach to healthcare and medicine, which it is on top of like functional medicine. So
Yes.
between that, my secret plan is to infuse functional medicine within the curriculum so that we brainwash them for the beginning to how to connect the molecular dots and think holistically and look at systems biology and connect the dots through network analysis. And they're like, oh, there's a gut brain connection, and you got to work on the microbiome, and
Yes.
all that other stuff. So that's
Wonderful.
my secret.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.